Picture this. You have just walked out of a high-stakes meeting, or maybe you've just hung up the phone with a family member.
And you're just completely, deeply exhausted.
Exactly. You find yourself rubbing your temples, staring blankly at the wall, and thinking it is entirely impossible that someone could actually be this difficult.
Because in your mind, you did everything right.
Right. You explained yourself with absolute clarity, you laid out the verifiable facts, you maintained a completely reasonable tone, and yet the message completely failed to land.
The natural conclusion, of course, is that the other person is the problem.
We jump straight to the idea that the communication failed simply because they are irrational, stubborn, or, quite frankly, just wrong. We have all been there.
Oh, absolutely. It's the most natural human response in the world to assume that when a conversation breaks down, it's because of an individual flaw in the person sitting right across from us.
But what if that completely natural response is fundamentally flawed? What if conflict doesn't actually emerge from individual defects at all, but from entirely predictable differences in the structural systems we use to process reality? Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world.
And today, we're diving deep into how those systems dictate our daily lives.
This deep dive explores Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erikson as a systems-level analysis of how behavioral communication styles shape perception, workplace dynamics, and interpersonal conflict.
The core mission of this deep dive is to fundamentally shift how you view your daily interactions. In the sources we're examining today, we are absolutely not treating personality as a set of fixed, rigid traits that condemn people to act a certain way.
Right, this isn't about boxing people in.
Exactly. Instead, we are looking at something far more dynamic. We are exploring the DISA model, or more commonly known in corporate environments as the DIC model, which stands for dominance, inducement, submission, and analytic ability.
So we are not treating this as just another simple personality test you take on the internet.
No, not at all. We are viewing it strictly as a communication system. This framework describes the underlying architecture of how different individuals prioritize information, how they construct their decision-making processes, and how they physically and verbally interact with their environment.
It changes the whole paradigm.
It really does. When you analyze behavior through a systemic lens, those frustrating interactions you experience every day suddenly stop looking like personal attacks. They reveal themselves as predictable, mechanical outcomes of interacting systems.
Okay, let's unpack this because to truly understand why this systems level view is so crucial, we have to examine the origin story that sparked this entire framework for the author Thomas Erikson.
It's such a great story, too. It perfectly illustrates what he calls the idiot illusion.
It really does. So a young Erikson, 25 years old at the time, was called in to interview a 60-something entrepreneur named Stur.
And Stur was not some struggling business owner.
Not at all. He was incredibly successful, highly respected in his field, the architect of a very profitable business. But within minutes of sitting down, Stur makes this casual, sweeping declaration.
Just completely deadpan.
Deadpan. He states that he was surrounded by idiots. And he wasn't speaking metaphorically. He mapped out his entire organization for Erikson.
Department by department.
Department A was full of complete idiots. Department B contained absolutely nothing but fools who understood nothing at all.
And Department C.
He claimed Department C was so weird and incompetent, he genuinely wondered how they even managed to find their way to the office in the morning.
The fascinating part is that this wasn't just a private internal grievance Stur had.
No, this was a massive systemic breakdown that manifested physically in the real world. Stur's communication style was so intensely abrasive, so quick to literally call his staff idiots to their faces, that the organization had to build a physical defense mechanism.
That physical defense mechanism is what makes this a fascinating case of organizational design. The system had to adapt to a persistently toxic input.
It adapted with actual hardware. At one of the main office entrances, discreetly placed above the reception desk, the staff had installed a warning light.
Like a literal traffic light.
Exactly like a traffic light. If Slosher was in the office and in a toxic mood, the receptionist flipped the light to red.
A physical warning system.
Yes. If he was away or in a rare good mood, it was green. Both the staff and the clients, and keep in mind, these are paying clients who were critical to the business revenue, would walk into the lobby, glance nervously up at this light, and if it was red, they would physically turn around and leave the building rather than interact with him.
which is an incredible structural workaround.
It is. So Erikson is sitting there listening to this man complain about his idiotic staff, and he asks the one systemic question that begs to be asked. He says, sure, who hired all these idiots?
Which is brilliant, because it forces the executive to look at the central processor. If the entire output of the system is failing, the common denominator is the architect of the system itself.
The implication was perfectly clear. If you hired all these idiots, who is the actual idiot here?
So I'm sure Stur loved that.
Oh, he understood the implication perfectly. He threw Erikson out of the office immediately. Erikson later heard that Stur actually wanted to fetch a shotgun.
That really escalated.
It did. But this interaction was the defining catalyst. Stur was not actually surrounded by people with low IQs. He was surrounded by people who were operating on different behavioral wavelengths.
Stur's definition of an idiot was simply anyone whose behavioral communication system didn't perfectly mirror his own.
Exactly.
If we look closely at Stur's illusion, it reveals a profound vulnerability in human cognition. Say Stur's prioritized rapid action and blunt directness, but an employee prioritized cautious analysis and detailed planning.
Stur didn't see a different operating system at work.
Right. He perceived it as sheer incompetence. When interacting systems lack shared awareness, the default human assumption is malice or stupidity, rather than recognizing behavioral asymmetry.
It's a massive blind spot.
It is the core illusion in the book's title, the deeply held belief that your own behavioral filter is the objective baseline for reality. Any deviation from your baseline is processed as a defect in the other person.
That sets up our first major segment perfectly. We need to examine the actual architecture of this system, because this concept that people operate on fundamentally different behavioral frequencies, it's not a modern invention.
Not at all. Humanity has been trying to decode this matrix for thousands of years.
The sources trace the lineage of this idea way back. Think about the ancient Aztecs. They observed human behavior and categorized people into 4 distinct elements.
Fire, air, earth, and water.
Exactly. Fire people were hot-headed, action-oriented leaders. Air people were captivating, easygoing communicators. Earth people built stability for the collective future. And water people were quiet, secure observers.
And if you fast forward to the ancient Greeks, you have Hippocrates developing humoral pathology.
Right, categorizing behavior based on bodily fluids like yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. Which sounds gross now, but it was their structural framework.
Then centuries later, Carl Jung brought this into the realm of modern psychoanalysis. We have always recognized that we process reality differently.
While the ancients relied on philosophy and physiology, the major leap forward in the structural architecture we use today came in the 20th century.
From William Moulton Marston.
Yes. In 1928, Marston published a foundational work called Emotions of Normal People.
Marston recognized a very significant gap in the psychological field. Prior to him, prominent figures like Freud and Jung were primarily focused on mental illness, trauma, and unstable populations.
They were looking at when the system breaks down.
Exactly. Marston wanted to observe healthy, functioning people. He sought to track how mentally stable individuals display behavioral differences depending on whether they perceive their environment as favorable or antagonistic.
And Marston's obsession with human truth extended far beyond standard psychology. This is the same man who created the systolic blood pressure test,
which laid the direct foundation for the polygraph, the early lie detector test.
It's wild. He was also the creator of the comic book character Wonder Woman, whose lasso of truth forces people to strip away their external defenses and reveal their genuine selves.
He was entirely fixated on bypassing the masks people wear to understand their underlying behavioral drivers. His 1928 research directly evolved into the DISA or DC profiling matrix used by millions of businesses today.
To see how Marston's psychological theory translates into tangible reality, the sources offer an illuminating observation in the foreword by David Bonstetter.
This is a great practical example.
Bonstetter's family built a massive behavioral software profiling company, and it originated from a striking realization in the early 1980s. I want you to imagine you are driving through the rural farmland of Iowa.
Okay, picturing it.
You are an agricultural salesperson, and your entire livelihood depends on selling seeds to farmers. Bonstetter's father realized that he could predict the exact type of seed a farmer would purchase simply by analyzing the physical layout of their farm from the county road.
Without even speaking to them.
What blew my mind about the Iowa farm story is exactly that he wasn't even talking to these farmers. He was diagnosing their behavioral matrix at 60 miles an hour just by looking at their driveway.
Because the internal system always reflects in the external environment.
Right. If you drove past a farm and the driveway was pristine, the groves were perfectly neat, the tractors were lined up with mathematical precision, that was what the system categorizes as a blue farmer.
They value stability, extreme precision, and proven historical results.
But if you drove past a farm and saw experimental livestock, brand new and strangely shaped outbuildings, and a general sense of chaotic innovation, that was a red farmer.
The red farmer is looking for conquest and innovation.
They are going to buy the brand new experimental high-yield seed that carries significant financial risk. The blue farmer will immediately reject that pitch. They want the reliable, historically proven seed that guarantees a predictable yield.
The exact same product pitch will fail with one and succeed with the other, simply based on the behavioral architecture of the buyer.
Our internal systems always leak into our physical environments. A mathematically aligned farm isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a physical manifestation of a psychological need for predictable outcomes.
This leakage into the physical world is explained by the behavioral formula that Erikson uses to anchor his framework. The formula is behavior is a function of personality multiplied by surrounding factors.
So mathematically, it is expressed as B equals F of P times SFS.
Correct. We must distinguish between personality and behavior. Personality is the internal, deeply ingrained core of an individual. We cannot observe personality directly. We cannot see into someone's psychological core.
But the surrounding factors are different.
Surrounding factors are the external pressures, the context of the boardroom, the stress of a quarterly deadline, the overarching culture of the company. When you multiply that internal personality by those external surrounding factors, the resulting output is behavior.
Behavior is the mask we wear.
It is the action we take. And because behavior is observable, it is something we can measure, categorize, and most importantly, adapt.
If I'm understanding this formula correctly, Erikson is arguing that personality is a relatively fixed baseline, and the only variables we can actually manipulate in an interaction are the surrounding factors and our own resulting behavior.
Yes, that challenges the modern, highly optimistic idea that people can fundamentally change who they are at their core.
If personality is a constant in the equation, then demanding that a colleague change their personality to suit your communication style is mathematically impossible. We can only ask them to adapt to their behavior, which requires conscious effort.
That is a critical distinction. We are not asking people to rewrite their internal source code. We're asking them to change their user interface based on who they are interacting with.
And to categorize these behavioral interfaces, Erikson utilizes a 4-quadrant matrix.
Let's visualize a standard graph. On the vertical axis, at the top, you have behavior that is task-oriented and issue-oriented. At the bottom, you have behavior that is relation-oriented and people-oriented.
Okay, so tasks on top, people on the bottom.
All right. Then on the horizontal axis, the left side represents introverted, passive, and reserved behavior. The right side represents extroverted, active, and implementer behavior.
So the intersections of these traits create the 4 behavioral systems, which Erikson color codes for intuitive simplicity: red, yellow, green, and blue.
This matrix visualizes the entire incentive structure of human interaction. When we decode these 4 behavioral systems, we aren't boxing people in. We are identifying their default processing speed and their primary orientation toward tasks versus people.
Let's dive into decoding these 4 systems, starting with the top right quadrant of our matrix, the red system. In the DISA model, this is dominance.
The Aztecs called it fire.
These are the active, task-oriented extroverts. At their core design level, reds prioritize action, efficiency, and tangible results above absolutely everything else.
They exhibit incredibly quick reactions.
Their operational time frame is always the immediate present, and they have minimal interest in caution or managing the emotional state of the room.
The red incentive structure operates on a dynamic of relentless forward momentum. For a red, idle time is not just a nuisance. It is viewed as a systemic failure.
They perceive themselves as driven, decisive, and ambitious.
However, the structural reality is that they seek absolute control over their environment because they fundamentally believe they possess the most efficient methodology to achieve the objective. Their communication is stripped of pleasantries because they view social friction as an impediment to task completion.
We see this vividly in the anecdote about Bjorn, a highly successful CEO Erikson was consulting with. Erikson calls Bjorn on the phone. Bjorn answers and immediately, without a single word of greeting, barks, "Were you looking for me?"
Hello, no, how are you?
Nothing. Erikson, somewhat taken aback by the hostility, replies, "No." Before Erikson can take a breath to explain why he was calling, Bjorn says, "Okay, and terminates the call.
The entire interaction lasted 8 seconds.
8 seconds. Now, society generally labels that behavior as rude, abrasive, and jarring, but from a systems design perspective, Bjorn actually executed a flawless optimization of time.
He established that Erikson didn't need him specifically, deemed his involvement unnecessary, and closed the loop.
It forces us to ask why we view efficiency as offensive. When Erikson later asked him about it, Bjorn explained it with chilling logic. Wasting time on flowery farewells was an inefficient use of breath. The task was complete.
Bjorn operates on a binary system that Erikson categorizes as slog or split. If a task aligns with a red's goals, if the challenge is clear and monumental, a red will go through fire and water to achieve it.
They will slog through unimaginable administrative pain.
But if they determine a task is meaningless, lacks purpose, or is driven by bureaucratic compliance, split goes straight into the trash. They have zero tolerance for administrative friction.
This is exactly why, to a red executive, a realistic budget is for cowards. If you aren't pushing the system to its absolute breaking point to see what's mathematically possible under perfect conditions, you are fundamentally failing to try.
The incentive is the conquest of the challenge itself.
Let's cross over to the exact opposite side of the task spectrum, while remaining on the extroverted active side of the matrix, the yellow system.
This quadrant represents inducement or air.
Yellows are highly active, but they are intensely relation-oriented. At their design level, the yellow system prioritizes enthusiasm, social energy, and persuasion.
Much like reds, they have rapid reactions and move quickly.
However, their operational time frame is almost entirely projected into the future. They are visionary, endlessly optimistic, and highly prone to impulsive, uncalculated action.
If the red incentive is the conquest of the task, the yellow incentive is social connection and the accumulation of social capital. The yellow architecture is fundamentally driven by ego and relationships.
They thrive on the exchange of emotional energy and the generation of momentum.
Consequently, they possess a deep-seated aversion to fixed systems, rigid structures, and detailed spreadsheets, viewing these tools as mechanisms of confinement. To a yellow leader, the collective mood and enthusiasm of the group is the ultimate metric of success, often superseding actual task completion.
The structural vulnerability of filtering reality through ego is perfectly illustrated through Erikson's sister, Marita.
She is textbook yellow.
Absolutely textbook. She constantly says bizarre, highly entertaining, completely unfiltered things. When Erikson stops her to ask, "What were you even thinking when you said that?" she bursts out laughing and replies, "Thinking I wasn't."
Which is such a purely yellow response.
Or consider her reaction to an impending storm. They're looking out a window at a pitch-black sky, pouring rain with a massive thunderstorm rolling in. Erikson points out the objective, bleak reality of the weather.
And how does she process that data?
She looks at the sky and says, "Sure, but after that the sun will come out. Just wait and see." She then sits on the sofa, unabashedly having a wonderful time while the storm rages outside.
That relentless optimism is completely contagious.
But it also highlights a massive blind spot.
The blind spot is that while yellows are unparalleled at generating energy, they often fail at executing details. Because they filter all incoming data through their own optimistic, socially driven lens, they are notoriously terrible listeners.
In a corporate meeting, they are more likely to ask, "Who is involved in this project?" rather than, "What are the structural requirements of this project?"
If a yellow is listening to your story, they are frequently just calculating how to transition the conversation into a bigger, more exciting narrative where they serve as the protagonist. Their internal thought processes naturally originate with the pronoun I.
They are deeply inspiring, and they possess the charisma to make a brick wall feel appreciated.
But they can fundamentally derail structured execution because they lack the necessary focus on granular details.
Which transitions us perfectly to the bottom left quadrant, the individuals who are desperately trying to hold those granular details together while avoiding the spotlight, the green system.
This is submission, the element of earth.
They are passive, introverted, and intensely relation-oriented. Statistically, this is the most common behavioral type in the population.
At their design level, greens value stability, harmony, and cooperation above all else. They exhibit calm reactions, they anchor themselves entirely in the current time frame, they take supportive action.
And their primary directive is the active rejection of conflict.
To understand the green architecture, we must recognize that their primary currency is predictability. If the yellow system is designed to generate vast amounts of energy, the green system is designed to conserve energy and maintain equilibrium.
A green inherently equates the emotional well-being of the collective group with their own personal security.
They operate under an absolute mandate of team before self. However, because they are passive and fundamentally conflict-averse, their behavioral outputs are frequently misinterpreted by the active quadrants.
What a red executive might view as laziness, stubbornness, or a lack of ambition in a green employee is, in reality, an incentive architecture perfectly calibrated to avoid upsetting the status quo.
The sources offer a poignant example of this stabilizing energy through Erikson's friend, Lasse.
Lasse is the ultimate green archetype. If you need a helping hand, Lasse is already there. He spends his entire weekend driving his kids, and often his neighbors' kids, everywhere they need to be.
He helps vague acquaintances move furniture.
He lends out his expensive tools without requiring anyone to ask. He will sit on the phone and absorb your complaints for hours. He genuinely derives joy from team before self behavior.
The book also paints a fascinating picture of a middle-aged married couple that shows this dynamic.
Yes, the husband is intensely yellow. He spends the evening jumping around the living room, inventing games, and demanding to be the center of attention. His green wife sits happily on the sofa, perfectly content to remain entirely out of the spotlight.
When asked if she ever finds his relentless antics exhausting, she simply smiles and says softly, "But he's having so much fun."
She willingly tolerates his singular behavior because his happiness maintains the harmony of her immediate environment.
That tolerance provides profound systemic strength to any community or organization. However, the shadow side of the green system is a monumental, sometimes paralyzing passivity.
Because they dread conflict and fear the unknown.
They will rarely take initiative if that initiative carries the risk of failure or social friction. If a green commits to a task, they will execute it reliably using established methods, but they will never invent a new, risky methodology.
They deeply desire to blend in. Operating in forget that you even saw me mode is a highly comfortable and secure state for a green.
So if greens are desperately trying to maintain peace and predictability, what happens when a process fundamentally breaks down?
They tend to freeze. But there is a group that doesn't freeze. They pull out a magnifying glass. Let's look at our final quadrant, the top left of the matrix.
Introverted, passive, and intensely task-oriented.
The blue system. Analytic ability. The element of water. At their core design level, blues prioritize accuracy, logic, and meticulous analysis.
They exhibit slow, deliberate reactions. Their operational time frame is historical.
Meaning, they obsessively analyze precedent and past data to predict future outcomes.
And they are deeply, inherently cautious. For a blue, the journey of analysis is always vastly more important than the destination of the decision. Quality is the singular defining metric by which they measure success.
If a red is sprinting toward the finish line, leaving a trail of broken glass and fractured relationships in their wake just to cross the tape, the blue is standing motionless at the starting line.
They're checking the wind velocity, analyzing the friction coefficient of the track surface, and ensuring their biometric parameters are perfectly calibrated.
To a blue, if a task cannot be executed with 100% accuracy, it fundamentally does not deserve to be executed at all. I found the anecdotes illustrating the blue system to be both hilarious and deeply revealing.
Like the CEO with the training manual.
Exactly. Erikson details a consultation with the CEO who requested training materials for an upcoming leadership course. Erikson, knowing the CEO was blue, handed him a massive, gapeless 300-page training folder.
We are talking granular detail here.
Specifying exactly what time the coffee breaks were, the exact angle the chairs should be positioned in the conference room, the precise font size of the handouts. Erikson assumes this will definitively satisfy the CEO's need for detail.
And a month goes by.
The CEO calls Erikson back and seriously asks, "Is there any more material?"
It wasn't that the CEO was incapable of making a decision. It was that the process of acquiring and analyzing the data was actually more psychologically satisfying than making the final call.
That perfectly encapsulates how blues process risk. They do not mitigate risk through action. They mitigate risk through the exhaustive acquisition of information. The unknown is their greatest enemy.
And this need for control through order bleeds heavily into their personal lives as well.
There is a story of a blue woman who vehemently insisted she was not a perfectionist. To prove her point, she claimed her house was currently a war zone of untidiness.
But when pressed to describe this so-called war zone, her definition of chaos was revealing.
When her kids came home, she felt compelled to meticulously line their shoes up on the front mat by size 10 in the back row because those kids arrived home last, with the smaller sizes perfectly aligned in geometrically neat rows closer to the door.
That slight deviation from absolute perfection was her definition of a chaotic war zone.
If we want to examine the ultimate institutional manifestation of this blue behavioral system, we must look at the Japanese car manufacturer Toyota. Toyota revolutionized manufacturing with a methodology known as the 5 whys.
When a problem occurs on the line, employees are required to ask why 5 consecutive times to drill down past the symptom to the absolute root cause.
Imagine there's an oil spill on the factory floor. We can see exactly how the 4 systems respond. A red manager sees the oil and says, "Grab a mop and clean it up immediately. We are losing time."
A yellow manager notices it, gets distracted by a conversation about weekend plans, and slips on it an hour later, turning it into a dramatic story.
A green manager sees the oil, feels terrible that it poses a safety risk to the team, puts up a caution sign, but quietly hopes maintenance handles it so they don't have to cause a disruption.
But the blue manager stops the entire production line. They ask, why is there oil? Because the gasket leaked?
Why did the gasket leak? Because it was a low-quality gasket.
Why did we buy low-quality gaskets? Because the purchasing department changed the supplier to save money.
Why did purchasing compromise quality for cost? Because of a corporate mandate. To a blue, mopping the floor is a useless, insulting endeavor. The only acceptable solution is redesigning the global gasket purchasing strategy.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have spent time isolating and mapping out these 4 distinct architectural systems. But in reality, people do not live in controlled isolation.
We work together, we marry each other, we manage each other, and we negotiate with each other. This collision of systems is where the core theme of our deep dive, The Crisis in Perception, truly explodes into view.
Because interpersonal conflict rarely occurs because people are inherently malicious. Conflict occurs when a message sent by one behavioral system is caught and filtered through a completely misaligned behavioral system.
This asymmetry is the crux of Erikson's thesis. Communication is never a perfect transfer of intent.
Asymmetry in communication generates systemic failure. Behavior is not received neutrally. It is always translated by the observer's own internal logic board. And when the logic boards don't match, the translation is corrupted.
Let's examine how these asymmetrical interpretations play out with the exact same observable behaviors in a corporate environment. Let's take that red trait of rapid, split-second decision-making.
Imagine a boardroom where a red executive makes an instantaneous decision to pivot a major company strategy.
Another red sitting in the room nods approvingly and translates that behavior as strong, decisive, visionary leadership. Let's go.
But a blue engineer sitting across the table observes the exact same split-second decision and is horrified. The blue translates that rapid behavior as reckless, careless, and dangerously unanalyzed.
The red genuinely believes they're acting as the hero saving the company time. The blue genuinely believes the red is a massive liability threatening the company's survival.
We see the same distortion with the yellow system's enthusiasm. A yellow employee spends 15 minutes in a status meeting telling an animated, passionate, slightly exaggerated story about a new client interaction.
To another yellow in the room, this is deeply inspiring. It builds vital team culture, emotional buy-in, and momentum.
But to a green employee who values calm, quiet predictability, that exact same enthusiastic storytelling is perceived as an overwhelming, exhausting disruption of peace.
The green feels physically and socially drained just watching the yellow operate, translating the enthusiasm as unprofessional chaos.
We can flip the lens again to look at a blue's cautious fact-checking. A blue software engineer insists on delaying a multi-million-dollar product launch by 2 weeks to run one final exhaustive diagnostic check.
Other blues on the team view this as vital, heroic quality control. They are protecting the brand.
But the red sales director looks at that exact same request for a delay and perceives it as sluggishness, cowardice, and paralyzing indecision.
The red yells, "We are losing market share to our competitors."
The blue replies, "We are preventing a catastrophic recall."
They are looking at the exact same data point, the exact same timeline, and experiencing totally incompatible realities.
This constant friction raises a profound question regarding how we build our organizations. The larger interconnection appears when we realize that institutions themselves develop behavioral incentive structures.
Organizations are not neutral environments. They artificially reward specific colors based on the industry, the market pressures, or the legacy of the founders.
If we analyze standard corporate leadership structures, particularly within Western capitalism, they heavily incentivize and reward decisive red behaviors.
The market demands quarterly earnings reports. It demands immediate growth. Therefore, the person who speaks the loudest, acts the fastest, and takes the largest visible risks is often the one promoted to the C-suite.
Conversely, Creative industries such as advertising, entertainment, and marketing will elevate and reward yellow energy, where networking, pitching, and charismatic persuasion are the ultimate currency of success.
And if you walk into an aeronautics engineering firm, a legal compliance department, or an accounting agency, the environment inherently privileges blue analytical thinking. The cost of failure in those industries is catastrophic, so precision is rewarded above speed.
If you place a highly yellow personality into a deeply blue accounting firm, that yellow employee is going to feel suffocated, depressed, and micromanaged by what they perceive as fascist spreadsheets.
Meanwhile, the blue managers will view the yellow employee as careless, disorganized, and a threat to their accuracy. The environment dictates the definition of competence.
Exactly, and these institutional incentives shape which communication styles dominate the decision-making processes. This creates a profound systemic blind spot.
If a company only rewards red behaviors, it systematically suppresses the cautious, error-catching mechanisms of the blues and the stabilizing, team-focused cohesion of the greens.
The crisis in perception is that systemic behavioral differences are punished as individual moral or intellectual failures.
When a blue is fired for being too slow in a red-dominated company, it is treated as a personal defect of the employee, rather than a predictable outcome of misaligned structural frameworks. The system failed to utilize the tool correctly.
So what does this all mean?
How do we actually survive and thrive in a world where we are constantly colliding with operating systems that are fundamentally hostile to our own? The sources offer a way to essentially hack the matrix.
But before Erikson provides the specific tools, he points to a psychological concept called the learning pyramid. It's a visual hierarchy that explains how human beings actually absorb, retain, and utilize information.
The learning pyramid is crucial to this entire discussion because theoretical awareness alone does not change actual behavior. The pyramid demonstrates that passive learning, such as simply reading a book, listening to a lecture, or passively consuming a deep dive, results in only about 10 to 20% retention of the material.
If you simply acknowledge Erikson's framework and return to your default habits, nothing systemic changes.
However, active learning, participating in discussions, simulating high-stress experiences, and consciously applying these behavioral modifications in real time results in up to 90% retention.
To resolve your personal crisis in perception, you cannot just passively observe that your manager is a red. You must actively change your own behavioral inputs to manipulate the output you receive from them.
So let's get active. Let's break down the precise strategies for how you adapt your communication to hack each of these four systems. Let's start with adapting to reds.
If you are dealing with a red boss, a red partner, or a red client, your primary strategy must be speed and directness.
When you walk into their office, you must ruthlessly skip the small talk. Do not ask them how their weekend was. Do not ask about their children. They literally do not care about building rapport in that moment.
Get straight to the bottom line. Present the solution, not the process.
But here is the critical trick: do not back down. If a red challenges your data, they are not necessarily attacking you personally. They are testing your competence and the structural integrity of your idea.
Managing conflict with a red requires a very counterintuitive approach for most people, particularly for conflict-averse greens and cautious blues. If a red throws a tantrum, raises their voice, or becomes verbally aggressive, you cannot retreat.
Retreating signals weakness, which a red despises. You must stand your ground and demand professional behavior. Look them directly in the eye and state, "I will not tolerate being spoken to like this. We will discuss this when you are calm."
Interestingly, the one thing a red detests more than anything else is being told to lower their voice. It feels like a direct attempt to control their momentum.
Therefore, you must confront the bickering directly, without shrinking, focusing entirely on the task rather than the emotion.
And if, for some theoretical reason, you actually want to induce severe psychological stress in a red, perhaps as a social experiment to test this framework, the book tells you exactly how to break their system.
You simply remove their authority. Put them in a group project and explicitly tell them they have zero decision-making power and must follow consensus.
Or, conversely, give them a task that has absolutely zero challenge or risk. If a task is too easy, they will lack all stimulation, become deeply frustrated, and begin looking for scapegoats because they feel their vital forward momentum has been stolen from them.
Now, contrast that abrasive approach with adapting to the yellow system. When managing or communicating with the yellow, the strategy must pivot entirely. You must allow them the space to shine.
You have to let them talk, let them feel seen, and actively listen to their enthusiastic stories. You must validate their ego.
However, if you actually need them to accomplish a tangible task, you have to force them into concrete, inescapable corners.
Yes, because if you vaguely ask a yellow, can you handle the client communication for this project? A yellow will cheerfully respond, absolutely, consider it done.
And then they will completely forget to do it because they got distracted by a shiny new initiative 10 minutes later.
You have to prepare a rigid, detailed plan and get them to physically say the exact parameters out loud. You need them to vocalize, yes, I will be at the meeting at exactly 4:00 p.m. on Thursday, and I will bring the printed quarterly report.
And Erikson offers a brilliantly practical, if slightly aggressive insight. When you are talking to a ULOE, you must be prepared to physically interrupt them the exact second they pause to take a breath.
If you wait for a polite, socially acceptable pause in the conversation, you will be waiting until Tuesday. You just have to jump in and hijack the momentum.
Adapting to greens requires a far more subtle and empathetic touch. Remember, the green system is designed to conserve energy, maintain predictability, and avoid conflict at all costs.
The strategy here is to respect their fundamental need to engage in what looks to an active person like doing nothing. Do not exhaust them with constant chaotic action.
Do not show up on a Friday evening with a surprise, highly active itinerary for the weekend. You must provide them with predictability and structural stability. Let them know exactly what is expected of them, when it is expected, and assure them that the process is secure.
And giving constructive feedback to a green is like walking a psychological tightrope.
Mm.
Because they are so deeply relationally driven, they take criticism deeply to heart. They feel like a personal rejection.
If you come at them with red bluntness, pointing out their errors, they will shut down completely and often resort to intense passive aggressiveness. They will simply, quietly stop cooperating.
You have to be gentle but clear. And here is the behavioral hack you have to speak to them in the language of feelings.
While telling a red, your behavior makes me feel sad, will get you laughed right out of the boardroom. Telling a green, it makes me sad when you don't complete your part of the project because it negatively impacts the rest of the team, is incredibly effective.
They will internalize that relational impact immediately and adjust their behavior to restore harmony.
Furthermore, if you are placed in charge of a group of greens, say, a department you are managing, you must be willing to take command.
Because greens operate on a consensus-driven, highly conflict-avoidant model, asking a room full of greens to make a decisive, risky choice is, as Erikson colorfully puts it, like trying to put a brake on a canoe.
They will simply look at each other, waiting for someone else to take the wheel and absorb the risk. You must respectfully, but firmly, make the decision for them, provide the direction, and they will loyally execute it.
Finally, we must learn how to hack the blue system. How do you adapt your behavior to communicate with the analytical perfectionists?
Strategy number 1, focus entirely on quality and data. Do not attempt to win a blue over by being charming. Do not buy them a fancy lunch.
Do not try to flatter them with compliments. They are completely and utterly immune to yellow charisma.
They judge your worth strictly on the merit, accuracy, and logic of your work. You must prepare meticulously. When you finish a report, double-check the data. Then triple-check the formatting. Then have a peer review it. Only then do you hand it to a blue.
Because a blue requires extreme, absolute certainty before making a decision, they frequently suffer from analysis paralysis. They will continuously ask for more data to mitigate the perceived risk.
To get them to move forward and actually execute, you must realize that simply demanding action or imposing an arbitrary deadline will only cause them to dig their heels in deeper.
You have to, metaphorically speaking, take off the blue parking brake. You achieve this by providing them with the exact, precise detail that completes their internal logic puzzle.
Once they are satisfied that the quality threshold has been met, they will execute the plan flawlessly. But they require physical space and uninterrupted time to process that data. You cannot rush a blue's timeline without sacrificing their trust.
It is incredibly liberating once you mentally overlay this matrix onto your everyday life. You suddenly realize you aren't actually surrounded by idiots. You are just surrounded by reds, yellows, greens, and blues, all operating perfectly according to their own internal code.
Precisely. If we synthesize the core philosophy of this entire systems-level analysis, it fundamentally reframes human friction. Misunderstandings that feel deeply personal, deliberately insulting, or wildly irrational are, more often than not, simply structural mismatches in how people process information, evaluate risk, and communicate their priorities.
Recognizing this behavioral architecture does not mean you will magically never experience conflict again, but it transforms the nature of that conflict. It shifts it from an emotional, personal frustration into a solvable structural puzzle.
I want you, the listener, to think about your own life right now. Think about your current workplace or your family dinner table. Who is the red in your life that is driving you absolutely crazy with their impatience, their demands, and their bluntness?
Who's the blue bombarding you with exhausting questions about data and historical precedents when you just want to launch the project and move on?
Who is the yellow talking your ear off and missing deadlines? Who is the green quietly avoiding making a decision and frustrating your need for momentum? Now that you can see the matrix, you have the power to change your inputs.
If you consciously change how you speak to them, you will fundamentally change the output you get back.
Which leaves us with a critical, larger question to consider. We spent a significant amount of time exploring how to adapt your behavior to survive within these different systems.
But here is something deeper to mull over. If our institutions inherently reward certain colors, like elevating red behaviors into leadership, are we accidentally designing our societies to be blind to the deep, stabilizing wisdom of greens and the air-catching perfectionism of blues?
What color is your company's culture, and what blind spots is it creating? Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
Absolutely.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
We truly appreciate the support.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
It's a great quick reference.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.